Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Florence Lambert, and I am the Head of Arts and Creative Industries at the British Council, Malaysia. I welcome you to our session, Climate Change, What Does It Mean for Arts and Cultural Rights? I am a 50-year-old woman with a French accent, I wear glasses, and today a red shirt. Throughout the session, we encourage you to ask questions to the panelists. Please post them in the chat and we will address them during the Q&A session at the end of the discussions. Today, globally, the youth recognizes climate change as its main challenge. While climate change has been well identified as a human rights crisis, the cultural rights dimension is overlooked. What does climate change mean for our cultural rights? Do the current policy address the issues and provide adequate response mechanism? Can sustainability be addressed exclusively through technological or scientific solutions? How are artists approaching climate change? Should we not listen to and learn more from Indigenous communities? To discuss these issues today, we are privileged to hear from outstanding organization leaders, artists, activists, and I personally thank them for sharing their time, knowledge, and wisdom with us today. To moderate this session, I am honored to have with us Dr. Milena Dragicevic-Sesic. Dr. Milena is a former president of the University of Arts Belgrade, founder of UNESCO Chair in Interculturalism, Arts Management and Mediation, professor of Cultural Policy and Cultural Management, Cultural Studies, and Media Studies. She's also a guest lecturer at numerous world universities and an expert in cultural policy and management for UNESCO, European Cultural Foundation, Council of Europe. It is my privilege to welcome Dr. Milena and our first three panelists now. Thank you.
In this time of capitalist accumulation of growth through increased global competitivity, in times of media saturation, of life acceleration that do not allow for time for reflection, art is needed more than ever. Artists are compressors of time. They see what is difficult to be foreseen, the sufferings of subalterns, invisible, often voiceless communities. Art scene is an incubator for ideas, and platforms like this one are enabling its outreach to those that are willing to communicate these ideas further. Aims of this panel discussion are to participate in global conversations about climate change, but seen from the perspective of cultural rights. To what extent climate change might affect cultural rights, both collective and individual, and how artists from UK and ASEAN countries are raising together awareness about it. In this discussion, we are going to have several representatives of organizations and artists. First, it will be Julie's Bicycle, as it was the first NGO that mobilized arts and culture sector to take actions on climate and ecological crisis since 2007, 15 years already. Up to today, they partnered with over 2,000 organizations internationally, more and more focusing in high impact programs and policy measures. Alison Tickle, founder and chief executive officer of Julie's Bicycle, will tell us about their actions and practices trying to reduce impact of climate change on culture, heritage, access to culture, especially linked to marginalized communities. She's going to tell us also what policies are needed. So, Alison, how artistic community might lead or negotiate bottom-up cultural policies advocating for intersectoral relations and role of culture in negotiating green agenda among other ministries in different governments, environment, industry, economy, with ministries of education, culture, and so on. Alison.
Thank you so much, Milena, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So very briefly, that's quite a big question, and I'm going to focus a bit on the policy responses because it's work that we've just been doing. So I'm a white woman, I'm in my late 50s, I'm wearing a dark blue jumper with a scarf, a dotted scarf, and I have a dark blonde hair, which I've pulled back. So thank you for having me. So Julie's Bicycle is an NGO mobilising arts and culture on climate action, and that has taken many forms over the last 15 years. We were founded by the UK music industry, now we're working internationally across the arts. And we have been very responsive. So we've really tried to unpick what arts practice needs to look like in the context of the climate crisis. We have always used three key core principles that guide us to this day. The first is that culture and the arts have to be at the heart of the global response to the climate crisis. The fact that they haven't been is, in my view, one of the reasons why it has not been an effective global response. Two, that bringing our collective imagination and joint purpose to this challenge is the most valuable and inspiring work we can be doing if we are involved in culture. And finally, that action comes in many guises everywhere and that everything counts. And this moment where climate change is taking centre stage for so many of us, we have some clear choices. We can remodel our societies and our patterns of consumption through our creative practice and the licence we give to polluters to operate at our expense, or we can choose not to. We can address issues of equity and justice in how we make those choices, or we can not to. And these, of course, are cultural questions. They're not, as you both have said, questions of technology or finance. They are asking us what we value, what future we want, and what world we can imagine. And frankly, after the disappointment of the climate talks, notwithstanding progress made, we are still facing very substantial global heating, 2.4 degrees of warming instead of 1.5 degrees, and catastrophic loss for many vulnerable communities and nature, those who have done the least to cause the climate crisis. The creative and cultural community has been forced globally to pause and reflect and has become increasingly ambitious in this new world. It's important for public connection, but also crucially for creating the very necessary conditions for much better cultural governance. And I'm afraid to say that up until now, cultural policy, with some exceptions, has not been paying attention to the encroaching climate crisis. So for COP26, Julie's Bicycle published Culture, the Missing Link. There is a link in the chat, or there will be, in partnership with the British Council's Climate Connection programme to see where climate and cultural policy meet. We spoke to artists, cultural ministers, cultural organisations, activists from across the world and ran round tables in Indonesia, Turkey, Nigeria, Colombia and Italy. Really, it was a call to action to culture ministers at national levels to meet the climate challenge head on. This is because governance and policy which supports climate action will not only address our impacts, but speak to us in ways that no politics will ever manage. Seeking and speaking truths is fundamentally what the arts are about. Designing what we care about for our economies is fundamentally what the creative industries are about. And the crafting of the past and present into beliefs and symbols is what heritage is all about. Culture, the voices that haven't been involved in climate negotiations but speak for us all, is so critical, perhaps the critical missing link. This research found a few very important things. One is that creative resurgence is everywhere. Artists, activists, brave pioneers, organisations and networks are deeply connected to environmental issues, bringing many perspectives, voices and ideas. But we also found that in spite of the Paris Agreement, requirements for climate action are still far too rare in national cultural policy. We have 2 or 3 examples of it, and that's it. In the main, priorities do not read across to achieving net global zero greenhouse gas emissions, nor to environmental discourse on justice, nor to just transition, and nor to nature. Yet many of the priorities of national cultural policies are environmental issues, especially relating to justice, cultural rights, diplomacy, safe spaces, social inclusion, connection to community are absolutely environmental and climate issues. And finally, there is so much evidence of a focus on climate and environment locally. Cities, local authorities for sure, but also activists, grassroots pioneers, artists embedded in their communities, speaking, connecting, innovating, really fresh ideas. This must inform national cultural policy. We need to work better together, to collaborate globally rather than to compete, to ensure that the best ideas and solutions can be adopted at scale. We need collective and fair targets and frameworks which are going to, at the very least, align with the science and better aim for regenerative creative ecologies, one that puts back more than it takes. This requires hyperlocal and sector-specific expertise to speak to strategy. And we need to make way for new voices, new creative communities, new economies, and the restoration of Indigenous, local and community knowledge. And those of us, like myself, from wealthy and historically extractive economies, need to take that extra responsibility. Because we know it works. Julie's Bicycle has been involved in policy now for a decade with our own Arts Council. It really works well. And there are other outstanding examples of policy, such as in Argentina, where cultural policy is reading straight across to net zero targets. And the creative mind put to good purpose has immense potential to protect and preserve culture and heritage, create safe spaces, strengthen community, bring joy and pride to places and people, as well as to drive circular design, new material use, innovative urban and city partnerships, and institutions demonstrating the future through what they do as well as what they say. New, vibrant businesses, ideas and skills with justice and transition at their heart. It's an amazing moment for culture. We need to inhabit it with all our might because we have never been needed more. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. You gave proper words to our next speaker, Eleena Jamil. As you said, the importance of urbanists and architects. And Eleena Jamil has 15 years of experience in creating enduring architecture by seeking spatial solutions with strong references to context and culture, contributing to sustainability, social sustainability even. So, Eleena, what will climate change, global heating, as Alison said, mean for ASEAN economies, societies, and above all, cultures? How architecture can act as an agency in society that is raising awareness, introducing new or revitalizing old, forgotten practices, in spite of needs of capitalist production system? Would you share with us some of your personal projects and how do you see ethical position participation of architects and architecture related to those issues.
Thank you, Milena. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the questions. I would also like to thank British Council for inviting me to speak today. I am an Asian woman. I've got a pink scarf on and also a maroon blouse. To answer the first question, one of the immediate effects of climate change is extreme weather conditions. And Asian countries are experiencing frequent typhoons, flooding, prolonged dry spells, and extreme hot weather. And we're also seeing more likelihood of transmission of diseases. So in terms of arts and culture, we are losing the economic opportunities in the cultural and creative industries. It disrupts the lives of local communities as it limits the ability to access and benefit beyond their culture. Human culture is strongly influenced by ecosystems, and ecosystem change can have a significant impact on cultural identity and social stability. Climate change can lead to rapid loss of culturally valued ecosystems and landscapes, as we are seeing that happening all over the world. It can lead to social disruptions and community marginalization now occurring as well everywhere. In terms of architecture, acting as an agency for raising awareness and introducing new and revitalizing old practices, we need to understand how important it is to get our buildings and construction industry right. Buildings and the construction industry contribute to nearly 40% of the world's carbon emission. So what we do as architects, artists, designers, builders, planning policy makers has a huge impact on climate change. There are so many ways to build sustainably. And one of these ways is to examine local craft, old practices, and see what we can learn from them and apply them to contemporary practice of creating our built environment. One will only need to look at the architecture of the past. For example, in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, we have the vernacular timber houses to see that there is plenty to learn from in developing and understanding on how to tackle the problem of climate change in this part of the world. It is a typology created by high levels of craftsmanship, as they are built based on a deep knowledge of the natural local materials and a deep understanding of the local climate. There is also this conscious attempt to relate to the occupants and their everyday life. And in the past, it was based on the beliefs and rituals with the aim of achieving well-being of people and the local communities. So this idea of an architecture that is sympathetic to the local environment, to the local people and its culture at micro and macro level is diminishing very quickly as we become more developed and become more obsessed with living and building more efficiently, seemingly, through modernization and standardization, and this full reliance on non-renewable materials like steel and glass. The need to build at massive scales and very quickly means that we have become less interested in asking how our buildings or cities are built, by whom, and what they're making tell us about the people they have been made for. So in relation to what I was saying about learning from the past, I feel there is an urgency to reconnect or reacquaint ourselves with techniques that are embedded in the past, in the craft and the culture of the people. I would like to share an image that can be put up, please. The collage, the B. So in this collage is some of our work and our experiences working with craftspeople to demonstrate a small fraction of the richness of local materials and the making skills of local people. And there is so much more to explore than what we are working on in my practice. So the idea is that craft and culture contain critical thinking that could help us tackle our current crisis. And to tap into this critical thinking, there is a need to reassess the current model of how we develop our cities. There should be more room to work with local renewable materials like bamboo, timber, hemp, like kanaf that we have growing in abundance here, different types of plants or soil, so that new technology of using them can develop. In addition, there should also be more room to work collaboratively with different groups of craftsmen and artisans so that we can tap into their skills. Only this way, good ideas can be handed down from one experienced person to another, from one generation to another, so that a tradition continues, mistakes can be avoided, old techniques learned, and new techniques emerge. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleena, for all what you have said about inclusion of vernacular crafts, opinions, practices. Now we are going a little bit further to Rosanna Lewis, who is a senior program manager for culture and development toward SDG goals, leading climate creative commissions in BC, Belgium. So we are going more to the global scale and global activities of British Council. Rosanna Lewis will share with us the British Council COP26 initiatives, 17 creative commissions of British Council exploring climate change through art, science, and digital technology. These 17 commissions are part of the global platform, the Climate Connection, developed by individuals and organizations in the UK, but working in partnership with collaborators from 33 countries. Rosanna, what role can international cultural organizations such as British Council play to raise awareness of climate challenges and connect people around the world? Can you tell us something also about Sea Project and how ARC Challenge grants in Malaysia are different from any other previously done? Rosanna, please.
Thank you, Milena, for having me here today. And thank you to Alison and Eleena for their interventions that have already covered a huge amount of ground. So I'm Rosanna, I'm a white woman in my mid-30s, and I have a virtual background of the British Council behind me, but I'm wearing a black top and a black jacket with some bright pink roses on it. So I wanted to just cover the role of the British Council and how our mission is really to build trust, understanding between peoples and cultures around the world, and to connect and collaborate through our three main strands of activity, which are arts, culture, education, and the English language. So we're by no means a climate change organisation, but what we do recognise is the global relevance of climate change to all of our lives and all of the countries in which we operate. So this is why we really see it as a key issue, not just for a scientific issue or a policy-based issue, but it's a cultural and a human issue that we all need to address and can no longer ignore. And my work in culture and development looks at the role of arts and culture to respond to global challenges. So it's very fitting that I am working on these creative commissions, which I'll speak a bit about later. But first, I'd just like to touch on the Climate Connection programme, which really aims to reach young people, people with lived experience, Indigenous communities, cities, researchers, and institutions, and engage with people at different levels. So whether that's a youth engagement, public engagement, and policy engagement, which Alison has touched on for arts and culture. With this in mind, the Creative Commissions was launched, and over 500 people applied, which just goes to show how much the subject of art, science and digital technology to address the climate emergency was important to people around the world. And I'd just like to highlight some of the key projects in Southeast Asia that are working in a cross-disciplinary way that address a number of climate themes and show the global collaboration towards climate action. So 9 Earths is a collaborative project in Indonesia, Vietnam, Brazil, and Lebanon, and the UK. And it's translating the scientific data that has been shared by climate scientists and activists around the world into human stories and captures people's lived experiences, daily lives, and their consumption levels and their ecological footprint. So it brings the scientific data to life, to build empathy, to inspire action, and to change people's attitudes. It's currently at the Bandung Design Biennale Festival, so you can check it out there, and there's a short trailer in the country pavilion as well. 10 Years to Save the World connects 5 artists in the UK with 5 in the Philippines, and they've developed a comic book which takes a kind of humorous side to the climate challenge and challenges our notions and understandings of the situation that we're living, to challenge our perceptions, to inspire people to take action, and to raise awareness of some of the key challenges that are faced around the world. And then the Awareness, Resilience and Collaboration grants in Malaysia specifically look at storytelling and the virtual world as a way to do that. Weaving Hopes and Ripple, which is around plastic waste. So I'd encourage you to go and check out those projects. But British Council, what we can do is look at our operational standards, look at our environmental indicators and put in place the environment strategy, which we launched earlier this year. We can platform the work that we're doing around the world and the work that others do through partnership and networks, such as our involvement in COP26, where we were present at the Blue Zone. We supported lots of activity in the Green Zone, as well as around Glasgow and beyond. And we can ensure that the content that we deliver is really responding to the climate emergency. And through our new global program, which will look at arts and culture responding to global challenges, climate action is one of the key areas in that. So institutions like ours can raise awareness, change mindsets, and inspire action.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Eleena, for passionate and engaged speeches. And most of the projects that you presented are cross-disciplinary, bringing together artists, architects, communities, but also technologists, city planners, engineers, but also local craftsmen, scientists, and many others. Projects actively involved vernacular architecture, local ideas, but also young people, groups, communities who are usually underrepresented. Dear audiences, we will see again these panelists in the Q&A session. So hang on to your questions or pop them immediately into the chat, so to be sure that you are going to have the response on them. Now, we'd like to begin the second part of the session with a short video of our next speaker. Video of Jacques Coyoc, artist whose work reflect, question, and provoke reactions on neglected issues in global conversations about impact of climate change. Directly related to minority community from where he is coming, whose words are rarely heard, it represents in the best sense engagement for cultural right of subaltern community.
My name is Shak Koyok. I am contemporary Indigenous artist from Selangor, Malaysia. I'm always trying to capture the tension and pressure faced by my people who live, interact with, and respect the natural environment. My work emphasizes the inequality that exists between modern consumerism and traditional sustainable way of life. My art is a reflection of my people and the rainforest which I grew up, and the importance of nature to orang asli.
Shak Koyok is a contemporary artist from the indigenous Temuan tribe of Selangor from Malaysia. In his childhood, land developers encroached the jungle around his village, and this experience is reflected in his many works. I have to say, I can feel the empathy now, as this kind of so-called development actions are exactly happening in this very moment in my country, in Serbia, because we are just becoming a real capitalist country. That trauma led him to fight for his people's land rights. He explores many art mediums, from contemporary painting to installation art. So I would like now to ask Shak how Southeast Asian countries approach the issue of climate changes, and to what extent traditional and ancestral knowledge is taken in account when things are developing. Are cultural rights of tribal communities endangered, and how your work is relating to it? If you can and would like, describe changes that you would like to see as an outcome of your artist actions.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, my name is Shak Koyok. I'm a Temuan Indigenous people. So I'm here with the brown skin, wearing the black headphone with a blue jacket. I'm currently in Wales, in UK. And yes, to answer that question, yes, I always wanting to show the cultural and also traditional way of life of Indigenous people in Malaysia. And because when I grew up, when I went to school, I don't see my culture, I don't see image of my people in our history book or even been taught in the school. So that's another reason why I show it in my work. And another reason is, Indigenous people, as everybody know, we live together with the nature. We basically use nature as a part of our life, because that's what we've been taught for many generations from our ancestors. That's a knowledge that we've been passed down since many generations. So it's nothing new to us in terms of living together with nature. That's as our tradition, and that tradition is inside in my DNA itself, and it's just come up naturally. So that's I think everybody should get some benefit from the knowledge from the Indigenous people itself, because we like Milena said, Malaysia already going becoming a capitalist country. So we are heading toward that. As you can see in my work, I keep question in the name of development, how far can you go, and how many people you can punish, how many people you can become a victim from the progress. And in that note, I think people need to know from the minority voices as well, because we are human like everybody else. Our voice matters, and it's so hard to share that what happened in Malaysia now. This minority become a victim of many development projects in Malaysia, especially in indigenous people. And a lot of indigenous people, we are together try to protect the nature from become extinct, from become destroyed, from become destructed by this so-called in the name of progress. And you know, that's I think is very you know, it's hard to find somebody or any people that have the traditional knowledge, and they're willing to do best they can to protect the nature without any payment, without anything, because for us it's part of our duty as a human being in this planet to protect the nature from being destroyed.
Thank you very much, Shak, and for your direct message to all of us. Now I would like to present to you another artist that we are going to have today in our discussion. David Finnegan is a writer and theatre maker from Ngunnawal country in Australia, for all of you that does not know where this is situating. He's using different media, from action movie wrapped in a TED talk in a kind of a transmedial adventure like Kill Climate Deniers, to performances and other form of artistic expressions. David, what in your work is changing, for example, when you are working locally in Ngunnawal country, or when you are working in the Western countries, or what we now use a term, countries of global north, or eventually when you work in Southeast Asia? Do you approach climate change from a cultural point of view of the local community where you belong, where you grow up, or from the context where you are situated? And to what extent science and technologies are seen in your work as possible solutions? So what is your message to the world today?
Thank you, Milena. Thanks everyone very much for having me. I'm an Anglo white man with a beard in his late 30s wearing a green t-shirt. If you could share the first image, I'll just quickly introduce a little bit about myself. So I work with researchers and climate scientists. I'm a theatre maker and writer, and I make work about climate and global change. Sometimes that is interactive work that takes place around a table. For example, this is an image of a work created with scientists at the Earth Observatory Singapore to help communities grapple with the impact of typhoons and volcanoes. And if you could go to that second image, please. I'm also primarily a playwright, and I write and perform work that grapples with these questions about the big planetary transformations. So this is a photo from a play of mine called Kill Climate Deniers, which was performed a few years ago. And the third image, please. So I'm a British Australian artist. I'm a settler. I was born and raised in Australia on Ngunnawal country. I now live often in Australia, but also the UK. I'm speaking to you right now from Wurundjeri land in Australia. So 2 years ago, my home country burned. This is a photograph from my hometown at the beginning of 2020, when Australia was hit by the biggest fires in recorded history. And a lot of my friends and families members had to flee from fires and seek refuge in different ways in different places. And fire is not unusual for Australians. We all grew up in fire, but the situation now in the last few years has drastically escalated. So when I speak about climate, I think my personal perspective is of growing up in fire. Milena, your question about the question of climate engaging in this kind of conversation in Southeast Asia. My instinct is, and it's just an instinct, but my feeling is that climate is an era, not an issue. It's the backdrop to every other issue. And so in that sense, sometimes it feels that the term climate change has become less and yet less useful over the last 30 years. It's gone from becoming something that we can point to and talk about to becoming gradually the context, the background in which everything else takes place. All the other struggles, all the other battles, all the other challenges that we're facing are being exacerbated and accelerated by climate. But we can't point to climate change. And effectively, it's something we were born in the middle of and we will die in the middle of, and it will last for generations. And we are not even close to halfway through this period of history, which will be centered around the transforming climate. So in that sense, I don't tend to use the word climate change when I'm engaging in Southeast Asia. My sense is that artists and activists in Southeast Asia are fighting. They're not necessarily talking about climate, particularly not in the way that it gets talked about at, say, COP. They're fighting very specific fights. And this is, I think, what Shaq was talking about. And my feeling is that those are the fights that we should be pursuing and following. Indigenous and First Nations artists and activists are leading on this. And so I think when I've been working in Southeast Asia, I rarely talk about climate change in the way that we're discussing it here. I would tend to follow the lead of the people on the ground. How are they speaking about it? What are their concerns and what's the language they're using? I love science. I'm a massive fan of science. I'm a complete geek, and I'm fascinated by what science has revealed to us about this extraordinary moment in the history of the planet. That's the way that I engage with the crisis personally. But I think that's one very small way to engage with the crisis. And thankfully, I think maybe even a decade ago, that was the only way you could engage with the crisis. We had to talk about science. We had to talk about raising awareness of what scientists are saying. And that is important. But I think there is a much broader way to understand this topic. And as Shaq said, Indigenous peoples around the world have led the way in terms of understanding how to live with nature. Indigenous people are also on the front line and have been the most effective climate activists globally. As an artist and cultural worker, one thing I will say I find tricky and strange about this is that when you're an artist making work about climate and about ecology, your work is constantly being framed as something that we can use to fight and something that's being used for a political purpose and to try and change things and have this immediate effect and impact. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's how the work that we make is intended. But also I think art is just the way that we understand and engage with the world. And I think also the art that we're making is trying to help us engage and understand with this extremely strange moment in history that none of us were prepared for when we were born.
Thank you, David, very much for these passionate words. And now I see that we got, as all panel, all five of you, a lot of questions from audiences. So I'm going to read them. Tien Duen Phan Duing says, very interested to know about Julie's bicycle teamworks on creative climate action. It seems there is still no collection with Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And yes, I would join this question. My personal feeling, yeah, in fact, I am the only one on this panel that have not represented myself as how I look like. I'm a senior citizen, a grandmother, but I'm wearing today everything that I admire from Southeast Asia. From Vietnam, this from Cambodia, this from Singapore. All these arts and crafts for me are important part of my communication with world. And Laos and specifically Cambodia are very often forgotten from all these encounters and Besides French Institute, there is no global organization really present in Cambodia, and that is something that all of us, and I think specifically as cultural activists like Julie's Bicycle or artists, have to fight against, to bring back artists from Cambodia, by the way, that are many that are really directly involved. Sorry that taking a lot of time. Alison, can you respond to this?
Well, I'll try. I expect it will be inadequate. So I think the point about culture, and I think everybody's spoken to this, and indeed things like architecture, Eleena, what you spoke about there, and Shaq, that culture is very, very local, actually. How we manifest engagement with climate, as David said, is really about our place. And Julie's Bicycle, we are always looking for stories, for lessons, for partnerships, for collaboration, because actually we've all got everything that there is to learn. And particularly, I think, in the context again of frontline communities, Indigenous communities, First Nation communities. Again, as Shaq spoke about, a lot of this knowledge is knowledge that we all need. So the short answer is, I'm sure we could do more. We're really excited to work with and learn from everybody who's out there. We did do some research, which included most countries actually in Southeast Asia, which was really about policy. But now is this incredible moment, I think, for us all to come together differently.
There is one more question for you. How can the art sector be more friendly to the environment? We talk about arts and climate change, but on the ground, when we do, especially music festivals, for example, there is a lot of waste, our traveling and so on. So what's your comments?
There is. I think we really need to challenge our practice very deeply. If you go to our website and the website of others, you'll find lots of resources and lots of support to really challenge the way that we work, because we need to convert ourselves from being an extractive industry in terms of material things. So climate change matters, greenhouse gas emissions matter, our use of natural resources and toxic resources really, really matters. And we need to examine that through a lens in order to start thinking about what does regenerative ecological practice look like. I also would challenge, and David, let's have this conversation, but I would challenge the idea of creative purpose. Creative purpose right now, as far as I'm concerned, needs to be put to the good of the planet, to human beings and to every other living beings. That feels to me like an absolutely critical creative purpose. And it's even more important that artists and cultural stewards take on that as 100% as a responsibility and an inspiration and a creative challenge, and just absolutely head into this space.
Thank you, Alison. And now we have a question from Mark Ocampo for Shaq Koyok. How receptive have you found others to be in listening to indigenous voices and artists about climate change? But you might say in general, how you find responsive the others listening indigenous voices?
I don't know. I just it's quite a tricky question for me, because I cannot say much about that, because as far as I know, I'm quite new to the art world itself, and I quite rarely show my work in the art exhibition itself. So, and yeah, I think I guess it varies, and some of them still unknown about indigenous people in Malaysia, because among Malaysian itself, because our education failed us, and also others who come from different part of the world, sometimes they're really interested to know more about my people, also indigenous people in Malaysia. And I think if you study about the indigenous people around the world, we basically the same. We have the same understanding about the nature. We have the same understanding about the world. We have the same understanding about our ancestor. So I guess, yeah, and it's, everybody should, try to understand each other. I think that's the best way for us to start, have a conversation or something.
Thank you, Jacques. We have also one very important comment. It's not a question, but however, Eleena might comment it. It's a really inspiring story, Eleena. I think Vietnam, as well as other sea countries, would have a myriad of interesting cases on utilizing traditional materials in architecture. A few years ago, I saw urban festival organized by UNESCO Phnom Penh in Cambodia about exactly contemporary architecture using traditional materials and so on. And it was really one exceptional urban festival run by students of architecture. What do you think, to what extent architectural schools in the region are susceptible to introduce in their, let's say, teaching traditional architecture and to show how modern, how contemporary it can be?
I think architecture schools has a huge role to play, because I think up to about a decade ago, the education is quite focused on using standard modern materials which are quite foreign to the craft and culture of the place of Southeast Asia. And I think what we all need to understand is that we have so much here, so much resources and so much interesting crafts and skills that we can utilize into modern contemporary architecture. We just need the time to kind of take a step back and look around us, because there is a lot of interesting things that are happening within the context of where we are that we could use to make really interesting architecture, to create a real identity for a place. Because what is happening now is our architecture and our design is looking very similar to every other cities in the world. So this is a great opportunity. I mean, the climate change is bringing up all these conversations about relating to place, context, and culture. So I think universities would be the first place to start.
Thank you very much, because I think also, being myself from the university, from the academic environment, I think if we change, if we allow context, people, civil movements to reach academic world, a lot of things can be changed for the better. Now I know that there are a lot of group movements, civil society movements, specifically in Cambodia, to protect Van Moliven, for example, architecture as national heritage. That is not yet, but also many artists such as Sopheap Pich are using only the traditional materials, bamboo rattan and things like that. So this is something that I think architecture, design, and art world can offer more. So I would like to ask David if he would have some comments coming, however, from some crossroads or territories where different knowledge traditions are mixing.
Sure. I mean, the space that I'm most familiar with is the kind of the intersection between science and the arts, which is always a kind of a fascinating cultural mix. But on the ground, I think my close collaborators are in the Philippines, and the kind of experience that we've had there working with people who experienced Typhoon Yolanda a few years ago, have experienced many other floods and so on, is that it's always been like the art is always just a conversation. We're always making something that goes into those people, and they kind of react, respond, and it comes back to being a discussion. So yeah, there is it's either not culture clashes, or it's all culture clash all the time?
Thank you. And I will have, because there is no more questions from the audience, I will have one question for Rosanna. Living now and doing in Brussels, but however, very much involved in actions of British Council in Southeast Asia. How can you assess, is, let's say, Brussels, European Union, British, whatever community, susceptible to really understand messages coming from other parts of the world, or it's, now I'm going to be a little bit provocative, or it's just now involving this, the voice of the other, is a new form of orientalization, exotization, new form of political correctness. We know that those voices have to be heard, let's have them, but are those voices really heard? Could you see any change in, for example, the behavior of British artists after working with indigenous artists throughout the world?
Thank you, Milena, for that very provocative question. I'd like to kind of go back to what David was saying, which is that as an international cultural relations organisation, our work at the British Council is rooted in that local context, asking and talking and listening to people on the ground and hearing what they would like to address through their art and through their creative actions. So what's interesting is that through partners that we're working with around the world, climate change has risen on their agendas at a very local level, and it's translating at a global level. And with COP26 being in Glasgow this year, back in November, well, a couple of weeks ago, it's given that momentum and drive to the UK to recognise it and to look at it as a global shared challenge, but that has local impact around the world, and that we're all connected through climate action. So just as all of us should tap into our creativity and recognise ourselves as artists, I think Alison's provocation that we also have a responsibility to all be activists, climate activists, and that combination of arts and culture and activism and climate, raising awareness of climate change issues in our local communities as something that is global and brings us all together. So I'm definitely seeing a shift in perception, and I think that's happening around the world. And in Europe, because I am based in Brussels, but I work globally around the world, there's obviously the Green New Deal that they're talking about a lot, and the culture team in the development sector is also embracing that and looking at the role that culture can play in their development work. So there are instances, things are moving forward, and I'd like to keep that hope and optimism for the future.
Okay, it's a nice ending words. I will try now, because our time expired, in fact, to try to recap. I hope that today, not only UK and Southeast Asian audiences will have a little bit better understanding of the impact of climate change and art's contribution, cultural approaches contribution to the reflection about those issues. And I hope that all those coming from the global north are encouraged to seek out connections with Southeast Asian arts, activists, architects, designers, craftsmen, how to engage on issues of climate change. Many works have been shown and collaborations that British Council had enabled in the area of climate change. Most of them were between United Kingdom and Southeast Asia, positioning British Council and art organizations from UK as important partners on this issue. But then we will like to remind what our audience also asked us to really take ASEAN region as a totality, not to exclude some countries, some artists. Now we should all focus on future, looking for opportunities and benefits of cross-border collaboration, transcultural collaborations, especially through cross-disciplinary art forms, arts and sciences, and intersectoral projects. So I would really like to thank all panelists, Alison Tickle, Eleena Jamil, Rosanna Lewis, artists, David Finnegan and Shak Koyok, as well as Florence Lambert and Erika Chung from British Council Malaysia that organized this event. And I think that although we were going, let's say, only in between these two areas of the world, we could have, and we really felt the I would say, issues that are of absolute global relevance, and that we should really reflect again what we are doing in the name of development, what kind of justice we are securing to all communities, and especially those that for different reasons are still today considered as subaltern, as minorities, as those whose voice do not matter. So thank you very much, and I hope that this discussion was also interesting for our audiences, as it was very interesting for, I think, all of us that participated in it.